India is the world's fourth largest economy, and yet every single year its infrastructure gap quietly costs it nearly 1.5% of GDP growth. This isn't a logistical inconvenience, it's a structural economic problem. So, what exactly is infrastructure deficit? Simply put, it's the gap between the infrastructure a country has and what it actually needs to be productive and competitive. India ranks 38 out of 139 countries in the Competitiveness Index. India's logistics costs are 7.9% of the GDP, and McKinsey estimates India needs $4.5 trillion in infrastructure investment by 2030. The numbers tell a story. India's road density is 1.66 kilometers per square kilometer. China's is nearly three times that. A container in an Indian port takes 2.5 days to turn around. Singapore does it in 10 hours. Rail freight moves at just 25 kilometers per hour here versus 80 in China. And it's not just movement. Nearly 30% of India's agricultural produce is wasted because of cold chain gaps. 190 million Indians still lack reliable electricity. There are economic consequences of the deficit. First, it deters investment. Poor infrastructure consistently ranks as a top three barrier in FDI service. It is a key reason manufacturing has been stuck at 17% of GDP for 2 decades. Second, agricultural inefficiency. India loses around 92,000 crore rupees every year in post-harvest wastable. And third, and perhaps most critically, it's a job crisis. Every crore invested in infrastructure generates 50 to 65 jobs, according to FICCI. For a country adding 12 million workers to the labor force annually, that foregone multiplier is not just an economic problem, it's a social one. To its credit, the government's response has been ambitious. The National Infrastructure Pipeline targeted 111 lakh crore rupees across sectors by 2025. PM Gati Shakti, launched in 2021, uses a unified geospatial platform to coordinate 16 ministries, a genuinely innovative attempt to break bureaucratic silos. Bharatmala is building 34,800 kilometers of highways. The dedicated freight corridors, both western and eastern, are now operational. Sagarmala is transforming port-led development, and Udan is opening up connectivity to Tier 2 and Tier 3 cities. The ambition is real. However, ambition alone doesn't lay roads. The barriers are also equally there. Land acquisition under the LAR Act adds 3 to 5 years to project timelines. Around 30% of NIP projects are stuck in environmental clearance stages. Capital expenditure competes with subsidies, and perhaps 60% of NIP spending must come from states where execution capacity is the weakest link. The roadmap is also clear. Complete the freight corridor network and operationalize Gati Shakti by 2027. Although the logistics costs are at 7.9% of GDP, there are a few things that can be improved, like electricity becoming more reliable and becoming more accessible, and closing the cold chain gap, and matching peer emerging markets by India at 100. Every rupee invested in infrastructure returns 2.5 to 3.5 rupees in economic output. Closing this gap adds 1.5 to 2% to annual GDP growth. So to India, infrastructure is not just an expenditure, but an investment.